Welcome back everyone, and a very warm welcome to all the new viewers joining us today. This is the place where everyday objects turn into extraordinary treasures and where pocket change can sometimes rewrite destiny. So settle in, imagine the jingle of coins in your hand, and get ready to dive into a story that has stunned collectors, historians, and treasure hunters alike. Because today we are talking about the legendary 1989 1-cent coin that has captured imaginations around the world and has been whispered about in auction halls and collector circles as being worth an almost unbelievable $17 million, and while that number alone is enough to make anyone stop and listen, the true fascination lies in how such a humble piece of copper-colored metal could ever reach such astronomical value, a story shaped by rare errors, astonishing mistakes, improbable circumstances, and the tantalizing possibility that one might still be hiding unnoticed in a jar, a drawer, or a forgotten piggy bank. And to truly understand how a 1989 1-cent could command such a price, we need to journey back into the world of coin minting, where precision is everything and where even the smallest deviation can transform an ordinary coin into a once-in-a-lifetime artifact, because coins are meant to be uniform, predictable, and flawless in their mass production. Yet it is precisely when that system falters that magic happens for collectors, and the year 1989 was outwardly unremarkable for pennies, with millions upon millions struck for circulation, designed to be spent, lost, or saved without much thought, but within that massive production run existed the potential for errors so extreme and so rare that they defied normal expectations, creating coins that should never have existed at all, and among these possibilities lies the foundation of the $17 million valuation, rooted in a perfect storm of mistakes that could include wrong planchets, transitional metal compositions, dramatic die errors, off-metal strikes, mule pairings, doubled and distorted impressions, missing or misaligned elements, and even experimental or test materials accidentally released into circulation, and each of these possibilities on its own can elevate a coin's value, but when combined, authenticated, and proven unique or nearly unique, they can push a simple 1-cent piece into the realm of legendary status, because collectors do not just pay for metal. They pay for stories, for impossibility, for proof that something slipped through the cracks of an otherwise tightly controlled system, and the 1989 1-cent is the perfect canvas for such a story, beginning with the metal itself, because by the late 1980s, the United States had already transitioned from the older bronze composition to a primarily zinc core with a thin copper plating, a change driven by rising copper costs, and yet the mint was still handling older materials, experimental blanks, and foreign planchets, and this overlap created opportunities for mistakes, such as a 1989 dated penny being struck on an older bronze planchet, which alone would make it extremely rare and valuable. But imagine taking that a step further, envisioning a 1989 1-cent struck not only on the wrong metal but on a planchet intended for another denomination entirely, such as a dime or even a foreign coin, resulting in a weight, thickness, and sound that immediately feel wrong in the hand, a mistake that should have been caught instantly by quality control but somehow survived and escaped into circulation, and collectors dream of such errors because they represent a tangible breakdown in the minting process, and when authenticated, they become undeniable proof of rarity. But metal errors are just the beginning, because the dies used to strike coins are themselves subject to wear, damage, misalignment, and human error, and a 1989 1-cent could theoretically exhibit dramatic doubled dies, where the design elements appear duplicated or shadowed due to misalignment during die creation, and while minor doubling is relatively common, strong, clear, and well-defined doubling on key features such as the date, lettering, or portrait can elevate a coin's desirability exponentially, and if such doubling were combined with other anomalies, such as repunched dates, distorted mint marks, or mismatched obverse and reverse dies, the value would climb even higher, because collectors place immense importance on visual impact and unmistakable uniqueness. And then there is the concept of mule coins, which are struck using mismatched dies not intended to go together, such as a 1-cent obverse paired with a reverse from a different denomination or design type, a mistake so severe that it borders on unbelievable, yet history has proven that such errors do occasionally occur. And if a 1989 1-cent mule were ever discovered, especially one involving a design from a different era or denomination, it would instantly become one of the most important modern coin errors ever found, easily justifying multi-million-dollar valuations due to its uniqueness and historical significance. And beyond mules, there are also brockages, capped dies, struck-through errors, and off-center strikes, where coins are only partially struck, missing portions of their design or showing overlapping impressions from previous strikes. And while many of these errors exist in lesser forms, an extreme, visually dramatic example from 1989, especially in high condition, could command staggering sums, because collectors are drawn to pieces that tell a clear and dramatic story of something going wrong in the minting process, and condition plays a crucial role as well, because a pristine, uncirculated error coin with full luster and minimal wear is infinitely more desirable than one that has been damaged or worn through circulation. And this brings us to the idea of survival rates, because even if an extraordinary error was created in 1989, the odds of it surviving intact through decades of circulation are slim, meaning that any example discovered today in high grade would be even more extraordinary, adding to its mystique and value. And then there is the possibility of experimental or pattern coins, which are trial strikes used to test new designs, metals, or processes. And while these are typically destroyed or carefully controlled, history has shown that some do escape, intentionally or otherwise. And if a 1989 1 cent were struck using an experimental alloy or unfinished design element and later found in private hands, it would represent a direct connection to the mint's internal experimentation, a window into decisions and processes never meant for public release, and collectors would compete fiercely for such a piece, driving prices into the stratosphere. Because rarity combined with institutional secrecy is a powerful force in the world of collectibles, and all of these factors contribute to the idea of a $17 million valuation, not because every 1989 penny is worth that amount, but because one specific coin, or perhaps a tiny handful of coins, could embody a convergence of errors so rare and so significant that they redefine what is possible within modern coinage. And this is where the psychology of collecting comes into play. Because collectors are not simply buying objects, they are buying the chance to own something no one else can. Something that challenges assumptions and sparks conversation, something that becomes a centerpiece of a collection and a symbol of status within the numismatic community. And when such a coin comes to auction, the competition can be fierce, with wealthy collectors, institutions, and even investors recognizing not only the historical value but the potential for long-term appreciation. Because truly unique errors are not being created anymore, especially as minting technology becomes more advanced and quality control tighter, making past mistakes even more precious. And this scarcity is compounded by media attention, which can transform a relatively obscure error into a household name, as stories circulate about a penny worth millions, inspiring people to check their change and fueling a cycle of fascination and discovery. And while skeptics may question such valuations, pointing out that they rely on hypothetical scenarios and exceptional circumstances, history has repeatedly shown that collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums for extraordinary pieces, as evidenced by other famous coins that have sold for millions despite being made of modest materials. And the 1989 1 cent fits perfectly into this tradition, representing the idea that value is not inherent in material but in rarity, story, and desirability. And this brings us to the most exciting aspect of all, the possibility that such a coin could still be out there, because unlike ancient artifacts locked away in museums, coins are meant to circulate, to be handled and exchanged, and even the most extraordinary error can go unnoticed by those unfamiliar with its significance, meaning that somewhere, perhaps in an old jar, a forgotten collection, or an inherited box of coins, there could be a 1989 1 cent that defies expectations, waiting for the right person to recognize its importance. And this sense of possibility is what keeps collectors searching, examining dates, weighing coins, listening for differences in sound, and learning about the subtle signs that distinguish ordinary coins from extraordinary ones. And it is why stories like this resonate so deeply, because they invite us to look closer at the everyday world, to question assumptions, and to imagine that hidden treasures might be closer than we think. And as you hold this idea in your mind, consider how many coins pass through your hands without a second thought. Next, 2005 D 1 cent coin. Today, this is the place where small coins tell massive stories and where the ordinary suddenly becomes extraordinary. So take a deep breath, imagine reaching into your pocket and pulling out a simple 1 cent coin dated 2005, something most people would barely glance at before tossing it aside, and now imagine that this tiny piece of metal could be worth up to $14 million. An amount that could change lives, reshape futures, and redefine how we look at everyday money, because today we are diving into the fascinating, complex, and often misunderstood story of the 2005 1 cent that has captured the imagination of the numismatic world, a coin whose potential value is rooted not in gold or silver, but in mistakes, errors, rare circumstances, and extraordinary possibilities that emerged during one of the most interesting modern periods of United States coin production, and to truly understand how such a staggering value could even be discussed, we must first step back into the early 2000s, a time when the United States Mint was producing billions of coins annually to keep up with the demands of commerce, vending machines, retail transactions, and a growing population, and the Lincoln cent, introduced in 1909 and deeply embedded in American culture, was still being struck in enormous quantities, primarily composed of a zinc core coated with a thin layer of copper, a composition that had been standard since 1982, yet despite decades of experience with this format, the process was far from immune to error, because modern minting, while highly automated, relies on massive industrial systems operating at high speed, and wherever speed, pressure, and human oversight intersect, mistakes can and do occur, sometimes on a scale so small that they go unnoticed, and sometimes on a scale so dramatic that they create once-in-a-generation collectibles. And the year 2005 is particularly intriguing because it sits within a period of transition, experimentation, and technological refinement at the Mint, with ongoing efforts to improve efficiency, extend die life, and maintain quality across multiple facilities, and during this year, cents were struck at different mints, including Philadelphia and Denver, each using their own dies, presses, and quality control procedures, which opens the door to variations and anomalies that can dramatically affect value, one of the most talked about possibilities surrounding a hypothetical $14 million 2005 1 cent involves the concept of wrong planchet errors, which occur when a coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination or even a different composition altogether, and while the Mint employs strict controls to prevent planchet mix-ups, history has proven that such errors, though incredibly rare, are not impossible, and when they do happen, they can be spectacular. Imagine a 2005 Lincoln cent struck on a planchet intended for a dime, thinner and smaller than a cent blank, resulting in a coin with incomplete design elements and unusual weight, or even more extraordinary, a cent struck on a foreign planchet made of an entirely different metal, creating a coin that defies expectations and immediately signals something is wrong, and if such a coin were discovered, authenticated, and proven to be unique or one of only a handful known, its value would soar far beyond typical error premiums, because collectors place immense value on wrong planchet strikes that demonstrate a clear and dramatic failure in the minting process, but the story does not stop there, because the composition of the cent itself introduces another layer of possibility. The copper-plated zinc structure means that errors involving plating can occur, such as missing or partial copper plating, exposing the silvery zinc core beneath. And while many such errors exist and are relatively affordable, an extreme example could be transformative. Imagine a 2005 cent with a nearly complete absence of copper plating combined with other errors, creating a ghostly, pale appearance unlike anything normally seen in circulation, and if this plating error were paired with an incorrect planchet or a dramatic die anomaly, it would create a compound error of exceptional rarity, and compound errors are where values can escalate rapidly, because they represent multiple independent failures occurring simultaneously, an event so unlikely that it borders on the miraculous. And collectors are drawn to such coins because they embody the unpredictability of industrial processes. Another key factor in the potential valuation of a 2005 1 cent lies in die errors, particularly double dies, which occur when the die used to strike coins receives misaligned impressions during its creation, resulting in doubled images on the finished coins. And while double dies are often associated with earlier decades, modern double dies do exist, though they are typically subtler. But in rare cases, dramatic doubling can occur, and if a 2005 cent were discovered with bold, unmistakable doubling on the date, inscriptions, or Lincoln's portrait, clearly visible without magnification, it would immediately stand out as a major variety, and if such a double die were unknown to the numismatic community prior to its discovery, its initial value would be driven by excitement, competition, and speculation, and while most double dies do not reach astronomical prices, an extreme example combined with other factors could push the boundaries of what collectors are willing to pay. Adding to this is the possibility of die clashes, where obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a planchet in between, transferring parts of each design onto the other die, and subsequent coins struck by those dies can show ghostly impressions of opposite side elements, and while die clash errors are relatively common, a particularly dramatic or unusual clash on a 2005 cent, especially one that went unnoticed for a long time and produced only a handful of coins, could add another layer of intrigue and value. And then there are off-center strikes, broad strikes, and multiple strikes, errors that result from misalignment or mechanical issues during striking. And while many off-center strikes are collected as novelties, an extreme off-center strike that still shows a full date and mint mark, combined with other anomalies, can command significant premiums. And when collectors imagine a $14 million cent, they are often envisioning a perfect storm scenario, where multiple rare attributes converge into a single coin, creating something that is not just rare, but singular, and singularity is the ultimate driver of value in collectibles, because when there is only one known example, the market becomes a negotiation between desire and availability rather than supply and demand. Another fascinating avenue of speculation involves transitional or experimental errors. And while 2005 is not known as a major transitional year for cent composition, the mint has a long history of testing materials, processes, and technologies behind the scenes, and if even a single 2005 cent were struck on an experimental alloy not intended for circulation, it would represent a monumental discovery, because it would provide tangible evidence of undocumented experimentation, and collectors would clamor to own such a piece, not just for its rarity, but for its historical significance, because coins are artifacts of industrial and governmental decision-making, and an experimental piece reveals a hidden chapter of that story. And beyond the physical characteristics of the coin, condition plays an absolutely critical role in determining value, because a rare error in poor condition is far less desirable than a pristine example, and at the highest levels of the market, buyers expect near perfection. A hypothetical $14 million 2005 cent would almost certainly need to be in exceptional mint state condition, with sharp details, minimal marks, strong luster, and eye appeal that elevates it beyond mere curiosity, because at that price point, collectors are not just buying rarity, they are buying beauty, prestige, and a statement piece that defines their collection. And authentication is the gatekeeper that determines whether such a coin can even enter the conversation at that level, because extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and any coin purported to be worth millions would undergo intense scrutiny by leading grading services, error specialists, and metallurgists. Tests would include precise weight measurements, composition analysis using non-destructive methods, microscopic examination of strike characteristics, and comparison with known mint practices and documented errors. And only if the coin passed all of these tests would it gain acceptance within the numismatic community, and acceptance is everything. Because value in collectibles is ultimately a shared belief system, a consensus that a particular object is worthy of the price it commands, and once that consensus forms, values can escalate rapidly, fueled by competition among wealthy collectors, institutional interest, and media attention. And speaking of media, the role of storytelling cannot be overstated, because a coin story, its provenance, its journey from obscurity to recognition, adds immense intangible value. A 2005 cent discovered in circulation, perhaps found in a roll by an attentive collector or even by a casual observer who noticed something unusual, carries a narrative that resonates deeply, because it reinforces the idea that anyone could make a life-changing discovery, that treasure is not confined to ancient hoards or locked vaults, but can exist in everyday places. Next, 2001 D1 cent coin. Today, whether you are a seasoned coin collector, a curious beginner, or someone who simply loves the idea that ordinary objects can hide extraordinary secrets, this channel is all about uncovering those hidden stories and exploring how the smallest pieces of metal can sometimes carry the biggest surprises. And today we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating modern coin legends, the story of the 2001 D1 cent that has captured imaginations across the numismatic world, a humble penny that many believe could be worth as much as $13 million because of its rare errors, remarkable mistakes, and the extraordinary possibilities surrounding how it may have been struck. And to truly understand how a coin from the early 2000s, a time of advanced technology and strict quality control, could ever be associated with such an incredible value, we must first step back and understand the context of its creation, because the year 2001 was a time when the United States Mint was producing billions of Lincoln cents to meet the demands of everyday commerce, with the Denver Mint playing a major role in this massive production effort, striking coins at incredible speeds using high-pressure presses, automated feeding systems, and dies designed to last as long as possible under intense stress. And while the general public often assumes that modern minting eliminates mistakes entirely, the reality is that large-scale industrial processes, no matter how advanced, are never completely free from error, and it is precisely within these rare breakdowns, anomalies, and oversights that legendary coins are born. The 2001 D1 cent was struck on copper-plated zinc planchets, a format introduced in 1982 to reduce costs, consisting of a zinc core with a very thin outer layer of copper, and while this composition allowed the mint to save money, it also introduced new opportunities for errors that simply did not exist with solid copper coins, because plating can fail, planchets can be improperly prepared, and zinc cores can behave unpredictably under the extreme pressure of the strike. And one of the most intriguing possibilities that fuels the $13 million valuation is the idea of a wrong planchet error, which occurs when a coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination or even a different coin altogether. And although the mint has strict controls to prevent planchet mix-ups, history has shown that such errors do occasionally occur, sometimes producing coins so unusual that they immediately stand out as once-in-a-lifetime discoveries. Imagine a 2001 D Lincoln cent struck on a dime planchet, resulting in a smaller, thinner coin with missing design elements and an unmistakable appearance, or even more dramatic, a cent struck on a foreign planchet made of an entirely different metal, such as aluminum or brass, creating a coin with an unexpected color, weight, and feel. And if such a coin were authenticated and proven to be unique or one of only a few known, its value would skyrocket, because collectors place immense importance on errors that demonstrate a clear and undeniable failure in the minting process, especially when those errors result in a coin that should not exist under normal circumstances. Another powerful factor in the legend of the 2001 D cent is the possibility of transitional or experimental errors, and while 2001 was not officially a year of major composition changes, the mint has a long history of testing materials, processes, and technologies behind the scenes, often without public documentation. And if even a single 2001 D cent were discovered struck on an experimental alloy or leftover planchet from a different production run, it would represent a monumental find, because it would provide physical evidence of undocumented activity within the mint. And such coins occupy a special place in numismatics, because they blur the line between official production and experimental history, making them irresistible to advanced collectors and institutions alike. Die errors also play a crucial role in understanding how a modern cent could reach such extraordinary value, because dies are the heart of the minting process, carrying the designs that are transferred onto blank planchets under immense pressure, and during die creation, misalignments can occur during hubbing, resulting in doubled dies, where parts of the design appear doubled on the finished coin. And while many modern doubled dies are subtle, an extreme double die with bold, clearly separated images on the date, lettering, or Lincoln's portrait would be immediately recognizable and highly sought after. And if a previously unknown 2001 D double die were discovered showing dramatic doubling visible to the naked eye, it would instantly become a major variety. And while most double dies alone do not reach multi-million-dollar prices, an exceptionally dramatic example combined with other rare attributes could push the boundaries of value. Adding to this are die clash errors, which occur when the obverse and reverse dies strike each other without a planchet in between, transferring design elements from one die to the other. And while minor die clashes are fairly common, a severe clash that went unnoticed and produced only a small number of coins could add another layer of uniqueness and intrigue, especially if the clash marks are bold and unusual, creating ghostly impressions that make the coin visually striking and unmistakable. And then there are striking errors, such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, and multiple strikes, which occur due to mechanical issues during the striking process, and while many of these errors are collected as novelties, an extreme example that still shows a full date and mint mark, combined with other anomalies, could be incredibly valuable, especially if it represents a rare combination of errors that occurred simultaneously, because compound errors, where multiple independent mistakes happen on the same coin, are among the rarest and most prized in numismatics, and it is often these compound errors that collectors imagine when discussing a $13 million cent, because the likelihood of multiple major errors occurring together is extraordinarily low, making such coins truly unique. Plating errors are another important aspect of the 2001 cent story, because the copper plating on zinc cents can sometimes be missing, incomplete, or improperly bonded, exposing the silvery zinc core beneath, and while many missing plating errors exist and are relatively affordable, an extreme example involving nearly complete plating loss combined with other errors could elevate the coin into an entirely different category, especially if the surfaces are original and unaltered. Because altered coins can easily be mistaken for mint errors, and authentication is critical in separating genuine errors from post-mint damage, which brings us to the importance of condition, because even the rarest error loses much of its appeal if it is heavily worn, damaged, or corroded, and at the highest levels of the market, condition is everything. A hypothetical $13,002,001 cent would almost certainly need to be in exceptional mint state condition, with sharp details, strong luster, minimal contact marks, and eye appeal that makes it visually stunning as well as historically significant. Because collectors willing to spend that kind of money are not just buying rarity, they are buying perfection, prestige, and a centerpiece that defines their collection. Authentication is the gateway that determines whether such a coin can even be considered at this level, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and any coin rumored to be worth millions would undergo intense scrutiny by top grading services, error specialists, and metallurgists, including precise weight measurements, non-destructive metal analysis, microscopic examination of strike characteristics, and detailed comparison with known minting practices and documented errors, and only if the coin passed all of these tests would it gain acceptance within the numismatic community, and acceptance is everything, because value in collectibles is ultimately based on shared belief and consensus. Once experts agree that a coin is genuine, unique, and historically significant, its value can rise rapidly. Driven by competition among wealthy collectors, institutions, and investors, and beyond the physical attributes of the coin itself, there is the power of story and provenance, because a coin's journey from obscurity to recognition adds immense intangible value. Imagine a 2001 cent discovered in circulation, perhaps found in a roll by a careful collector or even noticed by a casual observer who sensed something was different, and that discovery being documented, photographed, and verified over time, creating a narrative that resonates deeply with people, because it reinforces the idea that life-changing discoveries can happen anywhere, that treasure does not always come from ancient hoards or locked vaults, but can be hiding in plain sight, and this idea is one of the reasons stories like the $13,002,001 cent capture so much attention, because they inspire curiosity, hope, and engagement, even if such a coin remains hypothetical or undiscovered, and while it is important to approach such stories with realism and skepticism, acknowledging that most 2001 cents are worth exactly 1 cent and that sensational valuations are often speculative. The history of numismatics shows us that extraordinary discoveries do happen, sometimes decades after coins are minted, when new knowledge, technology, or awareness brings previously overlooked errors to light. Next. 1988 today. This is the place where everyday coins turn into extraordinary stories and where pocket change can suddenly feel like buried treasure. So settle in, imagine holding a simple copper-colored cent between your fingers, and let your curiosity take over as we dive deep into one of the most astonishing and controversial stories in modern numismatics. The legendary tale of the 1988 D1 cent that has been whispered about among collectors, dreamers, and treasure hunters as a coin that could cost as much as $15 million, a value so unbelievable that it almost sounds like fiction, yet it is precisely this mix of mystery, error, possibility, and human fascination that makes this penny such a powerful subject, because on the surface it looks ordinary, like the millions of cents that passed through vending machines, cash registers, and children's piggy banks in the late 1980s. But hidden within a tiny number of these coins are mistakes so rare, so extreme, and so intriguing that they challenge everything we think we know about money, value, and perfection. And to understand how a 1988 D1 cent could ever reach such a staggering price, we have to begin by understanding the environment in which it was born. The Denver Mint in 1988 was operating at enormous production levels, striking hundreds of millions of Lincoln cents to meet everyday circulation demand, and during this period the United States Mint was still using copper-plated zinc planchets for cents, a transition that had begun earlier in the decade to reduce costs, and these planchets consisted of a core of zinc coated with a very thin layer of copper, a combination that worked well most of the time but also introduced new opportunities for error, because whenever metals, machinery, speed, and human oversight come together, the possibility of imperfection is always present, and in 1988, the Denver Mint was no exception. As presses ran at high speed, dies wore down, planchets were fed rapidly into striking chambers, and quality control, while strict, could never be absolute, and this is where the seeds of legend were planted, because certain types of errors that year are believed by some collectors to have escaped detection, creating coins that defy normal standards and ignite the imagination. One of the most talked about possibilities involves transitional errors, the kind that occur when a coin is struck on the wrong type of planchet, and while officially the mint had fully transitioned to copper-plated zinc cents by 1988, rumors persist of experimental planchets, leftover materials, or improperly mixed blanks that could have resulted in cents struck on solid copper planchets of an earlier standard or on planchets intended for foreign coins or even other denominations. And if a genuine 1988 D cent were discovered struck on a solid copper planchet weighing approximately 3.11 grams instead of the standard 2.5 grams, verified by metallurgical testing and authenticated by top grading services, such a coin would instantly become one of the most important modern mint errors ever discovered, because it would represent a clear and dramatic deviation from established mint practices, and rarity combined with historical significance is the lifeblood of extreme value. But transitional errors are only one chapter in this story, because die errors play an equally compelling role, and the late 1980s were a time when die technology was evolving, with hubbing processes sometimes producing double dies when misalignments occurred between impressions, and while famous double dies are often associated with earlier decades, the possibility of an extreme double die obverse or reverse in 1988 D cents cannot be dismissed, especially one showing dramatic doubling on the date, the mint mark, or the inscriptions. And when doubling is strong enough to be visible without magnification, collectors take notice, but for a coin to reach multi-million dollar territory, the doubling would need to be extraordinary, perhaps combined with other errors, creating a unique convergence that numismatists call a compound error. Imagine a 1988 D cent with a bold double die obverse, clearly showing separation in the letters of Liberty and In God We Trust, paired with a repunched or misplaced mint mark that sits slightly off from its intended position, all struck on an incorrect planchet. Such a coin would be so unusual that it would immediately become the centerpiece of any advanced collection, but even this might not fully explain the $15 million valuation some speculate about, which leads us to even more dramatic possibilities, such as off-metal strikes involving aluminum or experimental alloys. And while aluminum cents are famously associated with the early 1970s, experimental materials have been tested at various times. And if even a single verified 1988 D cent struck on an aluminum or other exotic alloy planchet were to surface, it would represent an extraordinary discovery, because it would suggest undocumented experimentation or a catastrophic planchet mix-up at the mint, and rarity at that level transcends normal pricing logic, because when there is only one known example, the value is determined not by price guides but by what a single determined buyer is willing to pay, and history has shown that collectors with deep pockets will pay staggering sums to own a piece of numismatic history that no one else can. Another error category that fuels the legend is the concept of major strike anomalies, such as broad strikes, multiple strikes, or coins struck through foreign objects, and while many of these errors are relatively common and modestly priced, an extreme example can be transformative. Picture a 1988 D cent struck multiple times with dramatic rotation between strikes. creating a ghostly overlapping portrait of Lincoln that looks almost surreal, or a cent struck through a piece of cloth or metal fragment that leaves a detailed and unusual impression. And while such errors alone might not command millions, when combined with other rare attributes, they add layers of uniqueness that elevate desirability. And then there is the mystique of wrong denomination strikes, one of the most fascinating error types of all, where a coin is struck using dies intended for one denomination on a planchet intended for another. And if a 1988 D Lincoln cent die were somehow used to strike a planchet intended for a dime, quarter, or even a foreign coin, the result would be an instantly iconic error, because the size, thickness, and weight would all be wrong, making the coin stand out immediately, and the mint works tirelessly to prevent such mistakes. But history has shown that even the most controlled environments are not immune to rare lapses, and collectors live for those moments when the impossible slips through. Adding to the intrigue is the role of condition, because even the rarest error loses value if it is damaged, worn, or altered, but a pristine example, preserved in near-perfect condition with sharp details, original surfaces, and minimal handling marks, becomes exponentially more valuable. And when evaluating a hypothetical $15,001,988 D cent, condition would be paramount. It would likely need to grade at the highest levels, perhaps mint state 68 or higher, with full luster and eye appeal, because at that level of value, buyers expect not just rarity but beauty, and beauty in numismatics is a powerful force. But beyond the physical characteristics of the coin itself, there is also the story, the provenance, the documented journey of the coin from the moment it was struck to the moment it was recognized as extraordinary. A coin discovered in circulation, perhaps pulled from a roll by a sharp-eyed collector, adds an element of romance that cannot be manufactured. And if that discovery were well documented, with witnesses, early photographs, and a clear chain of custody, it would strengthen the coin's legitimacy and desirability. And provenance has played a decisive role in the valuation of many famous coins throughout history, because collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying narrative, authenticity, and connection to the past. And in the case of a 1988 D cent valued at $15 million, the narrative would need to be compelling, perhaps involving years of skepticism followed by eventual authentication, debates among experts, and confirmation through advanced testing. And this brings us to the critical role of authentication, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the numismatic community is rightly cautious about sensational valuations. So any coin rumored to be worth millions would need to pass rigorous examination by leading grading services, metallurgists, and error specialists. Tests would include weight analysis, X-ray fluorescence to determine metal composition, microscopic examination of strike characteristics, and comparison with known mint practices of the era. And only if all evidence aligned would the coin gain acceptance. And acceptance is everything, because value in collectibles is ultimately a consensus, a shared belief among buyers and sellers that an object is worth what it commands. And once that belief solidifies, prices can soar. And the speculative $15 million figure attached to a 1988 D cent reflects not just what the coin is, but what it represents. The idea that even in a modern era of mass production, there are still secrets waiting to be uncovered, mistakes waiting to be recognized, and fortunes waiting to be found. And this idea resonates deeply with people because it suggests that extraordinary value can hide in plain sight. Next. 1984 1 cent. Today, this channel is where ordinary objects turn into extraordinary stories and where the smallest details can unlock life-changing discoveries. So get comfortable, keep your curiosity sharp, and let your imagination travel with us as we dive into one of the most astonishing and mysterious coin stories ever whispered about in the numismatic world. The legendary 1984 1 cent that has been rumored, debated, analyzed, and dreamed about as a coin potentially worth an unbelievable $16 million, a value that seems almost impossible when you consider it began its life as a humble penny meant to buy almost nothing. Yet this staggering price is not based on fantasy alone but on a convergence of rare errors, shocking mint mistakes, improbable circumstances, and the enduring possibility that one such coin may still exist unnoticed among everyday change, tucked away in drawers, jars, inherited collections, or forgotten boxes, waiting for the right set of eyes to recognize its significance. And to truly understand how a 1984 1 cent could reach such a monumental valuation, we must first understand the world in which it was created, because coin minting is a process built on precision, repetition, and strict control, where millions of identical coins are produced with the expectation of uniformity, and yet it is precisely when this system fails, when something goes wrong at exactly the wrong moment, that numismatic legends are born, and the year 1984 stands at a fascinating crossroads in United States coinage history, because it falls within a transitional era of materials, technology, and production pressures that created fertile ground for errors both subtle and extreme, and while most 1984 pennies are worth only face value, the few that deviate dramatically from the norm represent the kind of anomalies that collectors chase for decades, because rarity combined with documented mint error potential creates a powerful magnet for value, and one of the most significant foundations for the $16 million valuation lies in metal composition errors, because by 1982 the U.S. Mint officially transitioned pennies from the traditional bronze alloy to a zinc core coated with copper, yet during the early and mid-1980s, the Mint was still managing leftover bronze planchets, experimental blanks, test materials, and logistical overlaps that created the possibility, however slim, for a 1984 dated penny to be struck on an incorrect planchet, and a genuine 1984 bronze cent struck accidentally on an older copper-based blank would immediately be among the rarest modern pennies known, because it should not exist at all according to official production standards, and collectors place enormous value on coins that contradict established mint records, because they serve as physical evidence that even the most carefully controlled systems can fail. And if such a bronze 1984 cent were discovered in pristine condition, fully authenticated, and proven to be struck at the mint rather than altered later, its value would soar into the millions due to its extreme rarity and historical importance. But the story does not end there, because an even more dramatic possibility exists in the form of off-metal strikes, where a penny is struck on a planchet intended for another denomination entirely, such as a dime, quarter, or even a foreign coin, resulting in a piece that feels wrong in the hand, weighs incorrectly, and displays distorted or incomplete design elements, and such errors are among the most visually striking and compelling for collectors, especially when the date is clearly visible and the error is dramatic rather than subtle, and a 1984 1 cent struck on a wrong planchet would represent a catastrophic breakdown in minting quality control, because multiple safeguards would have failed simultaneously, allowing an incorrect blank to enter the striking chamber and then escape inspection, and the more extreme and undeniable the error, the higher the value climbs, especially when paired with high-grade preservation. And then there is the realm of die-related errors, which opens an entirely new dimension of possibility, because the dies used to strike coins are themselves created through a multi-step process that can introduce mistakes at various stages, including double dies caused by misalignment during hubbing, repunched dates where numerals are stamped more than once in slightly different positions, distorted lettering due to die damage or fatigue, and even mismatched obverse and reverse dies that were never meant to be paired together. And while minor die errors are relatively common, bold and unmistakable double dies with strong separation in the date or lettering are rare and highly prized, and if a 1984 penny were discovered with extreme doubling combined with another major anomaly, its value would multiply exponentially, because collectors value coins that tell a clear visual story without requiring explanation, and some of the most valuable error coins in history share this trait of immediate recognizability. And perhaps one of the most fascinating and lucrative possibilities is the idea of a mule error, where a coin is struck using dies from two different denominations or design types that were never intended to be used together, a mistake so severe that it borders on unbelievable, yet documented examples from other years prove it is possible. And a 1984 1 cent mule involving a mismatched reverse or experimental die would instantly become one of the most important modern U.S. error coins ever discovered, because it would represent a failure at the highest level of minting oversight, and uniqueness plays a crucial role here, because the closer a coin comes to being one of a kind, the less constrained its value becomes, allowing collectors to compete fiercely and push prices into uncharted territory. And then there are striking errors such as off-center strikes, broad strikes, brockages, capped dies, and struck through debris, each of which tells a story of mechanical malfunction or interruption during the striking process. And while many of these errors exist in minor forms, an extreme example from 1984 with dramatic visual impact and minimal wear would stand apart from the rest, because collectors are drawn to coins that look unmistakably wrong, coins that immediately demand attention, and when such an error survives decades without damage, its desirability increases even further, and condition cannot be overstated in this discussion, because a flawless or near-flawless error coin is exponentially more valuable than a damaged one, and a 1984 error penny preserved in mint state condition would be a numismatic miracle, considering how many pennies circulate, get scratched, corroded, or discarded. And survival rates play a massive role in valuation, because even if a handful of extraordinary errors were created, only one or two may still exist in collectible condition today, and that scarcity fuels both demand and legend, and beyond production errors lies the tantalizing possibility of experimental or pattern coins, which are trial strikes created to test new materials, finishes, or processes, and while such pieces are typically destroyed or tightly controlled, history has shown that some escape into private hands, either accidentally or through undocumented channels, and a 1984 1-cent struck on an experimental alloy or using a test die would represent a direct link to the mint's internal development process, a glimpse behind the curtain that collectors crave, and the secrecy surrounding such pieces only adds to their allure, because the less that is officially known, the more powerful the mystery becomes, and this mystery is a key ingredient in driving multi-million-dollar valuations. Because collectors are not just buying metal, they are buying stories, exclusivity, and the thrill of owning something that challenges established records, and when such a coin is authenticated by respected grading services, its legitimacy transforms speculation into tangible reality, opening the door for elite collectors and institutions to compete for ownership, and as bidding wars escalate, prices can climb far beyond initial expectations. Because truly unique coins are not constrained by typical market comparisons, and this phenomenon has been observed repeatedly throughout numismatic history, where coins made of modest materials have sold for millions simply because of their rarity, error significance, and historical context, and the 1984 1-cent fits perfectly within this tradition, embodying the idea that value is not defined by denomination but by circumstance, and perhaps the most captivating aspect of this entire story is the idea that such a coin could still be out there, because unlike ancient relics locked away in museums, pennies are designed to circulate freely, to pass from hand to hand without notice, and even the most extraordinary error can go unrecognized by those unfamiliar with its significance, meaning that a $16 million coin could theoretically sit unnoticed in a jar of spare change, an inherited collection, or a forgotten roll of pennies. Last 2016 1-cent coin. Today we are diving deep into a story that sounds almost impossible yet continues to excite collectors and treasure hunters around the world, the astonishing tale of a 2016 1-cent coin that can cost as much as $9 million due to a unique combination of errors, mistakes, and extraordinary possibilities. A modern penny that challenges the belief that only ancient or gold coins can hold life-changing value, and as we explore this topic together, imagine holding an ordinary-looking cent in your hand, minted only a few years ago, something most people would casually drop into a jar or spend without a second thought, yet within that tiny copper-colored disc could be a rare set of minting anomalies that transforms it from spare change into a multi-million-dollar collectible, and this is why the 2016 1-cent has captured the attention of numismatists, error coin specialists, and everyday people alike, because it represents the thrilling possibility that extraordinary wealth can sometimes be found in the most ordinary places, and to truly understand how a 2016 1-cent could ever reach such an astonishing valuation, we must first understand how modern coins are made and how errors occur, because the United States Mint operates with extremely precise machinery designed to strike millions of coins with near-perfect consistency, yet despite advanced technology, the minting process still involves human oversight, complex mechanical systems, and enormous production volumes, and it is precisely at the intersection of speed, pressure, and precision where mistakes can happen, and when those mistakes slip past quality control, they create the rare errors that collectors prize so highly, and in 2016 the U.S. Mint produced billions of 1-cent coins across multiple facilities, primarily Philadelphia and Denver, meaning that even a tiny percentage of errors could result in a small number of extremely rare pieces entering circulation, and these errors can take many forms, ranging from dramatic and obvious to subtle and nearly invisible to the untrained eye, yet it is often the rare combination of multiple errors on a single coin that pushes its value into the stratosphere. And when collectors speak about a 2016 penny being worth $9 million, they are not referring to an ordinary cent, but to a hypothetical or documented specimen exhibiting an extraordinary convergence of the most desirable and rare minting mistakes imaginable, beginning with planchet errors, because the planchet, the blank metal disc that becomes a coin, is the foundation of the entire minting process, and if the planchet itself is wrong, everything that follows is affected, and one of the most valuable possibilities for a 2016 1 cent is being struck on the wrong metal planchet, such as a bronze planchet intended for an earlier era, or even more extraordinarily, a planchet meant for another denomination or another country entirely, and while modern cents are primarily copper-plated zinc, a 2016 cent struck on a solid bronze planchet, or a foreign alloy, would be a sensational discovery, especially if verified by professional grading services, because transitional and wrong metal errors are among the most valuable in modern numismatics, and when combined with other errors, their value multiplies exponentially. And another critical category of error involves die varieties, which occur when the dies used to strike coins contain mistakes or variations, such as doubled dies, repunched mint marks, or misaligned design elements, and a 2016 1 cent with a dramatic double die obverse or reverse, where the lettering, date, or Lincoln's features appear clearly doubled due to multiple impressions during die creation, would already command significant attention, but when collectors imagine a $9 million coin, they envision doubling so bold and widespread that it affects nearly every design element, creating a striking and unmistakable appearance that stands out even without magnification. And then there are off-center strikes, another beloved category of mint errors, which occur when the planchet is not properly seated between the dies at the moment of striking, resulting in a design that is shifted to one side, sometimes leaving a portion of the coin blank. And while minor off-center strikes are relatively common and modestly valuable, a dramatic off-center strike that still includes the full date and mint mark is far rarer, and when combined with other errors, it becomes exponentially more desirable. And now imagine a 2016 1 cent that is not only off-center but also struck on the wrong planchet and exhibiting dramatic doubling, and you begin to understand how such a coin could move from thousands to millions in theoretical value. And another fascinating error possibility involves multiple strikes, where a coin is struck more than once by the dies, sometimes with rotation between strikes, creating overlapping images that appear almost abstract. And a multiple struck 2016 cent, especially one struck outside the collar or with significant rotation, would be a spectacular example of minting chaos frozen in metal, and collectors are particularly drawn to these coins because they visually tell the story of the minting process gone awry, and the more complex and visually dramatic the error, the more desirable it becomes. And yet another layer of potential value comes from die breaks and cuds, which occur when a die cracks or breaks during use, leaving raised blobs or missing design elements on the coin. And while small die cracks are common and often overlooked, massive die breaks that dramatically alter the coin's appearance are far rarer, and a 2016 1 cent displaying a huge cud that obliterates part of the design, combined with other major errors, would be an extraordinary find. And then there are collar errors, where the retaining collar that shapes the coin's edge malfunctions, resulting in broad strikes or coins with distorted edges, and a broad-struck 2016 cent with a larger than normal diameter, especially if combined with other errors, would further add to its uniqueness. And uniqueness is one of the most critical factors in determining a coin's value, because collectors are not simply buying metal, they are buying rarity, history, and the story behind the object. And the story of a 2016 penny that escaped the mint with a cascade of errors is a story that captures the imagination. And beyond physical errors, condition plays a crucial role, because even the rarest error coin loses significant value if it is heavily worn or damaged after leaving the mint. And for a 2016 1 cent to reach a valuation anywhere near $9 million, it would need to be in exceptional condition, ideally uncirculated, with original mint luster intact, and no signs of post-mint damage, cleaning, or alteration, because collectors and auction houses place enormous emphasis on authenticity and preservation, and this is where professional grading and certification become essential, because a coin of such extraordinary claimed value would need to be authenticated by the most respected third-party grading services, which would carefully examine its metal composition, strike characteristics, die markers, and overall condition to confirm that the errors are genuine and occurred during the minting process rather than being the result of damage or tampering. And once certified, such a coin would likely become one of the most talked about modern era coins in existence, attracting attention from elite collectors, museums, and investors, and the price could then be driven upward through private sales or high-profile auctions, where competition among wealthy collectors can push values to astonishing levels. And it is important to understand that when people speak of a $9 million penny, they are often referencing the upper extreme of what is theoretically possible given the right combination of factors, because the coin market, like the art market, is driven not only by intrinsic rarity but by demand, storytelling, and prestige, and a unique 2016 cent that represents a once-in-a-generation minting anomaly could become a symbol of modern numismatic legend, and legends have a way of commanding extraordinary prices, and the possibility that such a coin could still be out there, sitting unnoticed in a roll of pennies, a change jar, or a forgotten drawer, is what fuels the excitement and passion of coin roll hunters and collectors worldwide, because unlike ancient treasures buried in the ground, modern era coins can sometimes be found by ordinary people with patience, knowledge, and a keen eye, and this democratizing aspect of coin collecting is part of its enduring appeal. And the 2016 1 cent is particularly intriguing because it is recent enough that massive numbers remain in circulation, yet old enough that any major errors would already have become extremely scarce, making any new discovery headline-worthy. And while skeptics may dismiss claims of multi-million-dollar modern pennies as exaggeration, history has shown time and again that rare era coins can and do achieve extraordinary prices when all the right elements align. And even if a $9 million valuation represents the absolute peak of possibility rather than a common reality, the underlying message remains powerful, that understanding errors, varieties, and minting anomalies can transform the way we see everyday money, and instead of viewing coins as disposable objects, we begin to see them as miniature artifacts of industrial history, each one bearing the marks of the machines and people that created it, and for those willing